Hey family, thank you for tuning into Our Roots podcast with 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲, brought to you by Botánica Candles and More, where only the strongest roots see the light. And if you haven't had the opportunity, please hit that subscribe button. What's up, Phil?
Hey man, happy Sunday. Good to see everybody here in the chat. And also, guys, don't forget, we have our membership program / platform. It's a nice community we've built and gives you access to a plethora of things, whether it be extra shows, discounts on merch, early releases to our podcast episodes. So, yeah, definitely hit that join button.
Absolutely. And apart from that, guys, classes are going on. 𝘃𝗶𝗍𝗲 School. We have the 4-week entry-level curriculum for all things Yoruba, Ifa, Orisha, as well as the Mojuba class. Great response on both, so be sure to check those out. And, yeah.
Yeah, so what are we talking about today, man?
Today we are finally continuing with our Meji series, right? We've gotten through quite a few so far, and now we're going downhill. Continuing with Babao Sami. Now, Babao Sami was really enjoyable for me. As enjoyable as Babao Meji, especially when you see the correlation between both of them being that they're twins of each other. But the reason Babao Sami is so famous is because of its correlation and link to the famous Iyami Osoronga, or the witches as they're known, or the elders of the night, to be more polite. But from the very beginning, this gentleman was intrinsically linked to them. And they say that in the story, there was a man, right? He was more of a farmer, right? And he was married to a woman. But he didn't know that the woman he had married was actually a member of the Yami cult. And this makes a lot of sense because in antiquity, it was something that really wouldn't be spoken about. You know, if it's kind of like the mob. You know, if you were in, you know, if you knew, you knew. So with the Iyami, it was the same thing. They wouldn't just go around saying, yeah, I am 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗁, or a witch, because there was, you know, consequences for that, especially if something negative happened. I mean, when you look at, you know, Salem witch trials and the Inquisition and all these different things, it wasn't a very glorified position because it instilled a lot of fear. So this gentleman actually married a member of the Iyami cult, and, you know, they did what adults do, and she became pregnant. Now, mind you, the way things timed up were really divine because they say that Babao Sami was born during an Iyami initiation or ritual. Like, his mother literally gave birth to him right there. So they say that upon his birth, he was automatically initiated into this section, and he was immediately known as Osho, which means warlock or wizard, right? Which is the male component of this, you know, organization. Now, this was really wild to the father because he had no idea that his wife was a witch, and the son, you know, was sworn to secrecy, and it just created a really toxic environment within the home where when you read the 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗁, it basically culminates in this huge blowout where, you know, the father, you know, tries to kill the mother. The mother was a witch, and they say she turned into a bird and disappeared. And the son had to learn how to interact with both of them, where, you know, ultimately he found his place with Orunmila, being that his father was afraid to interact with him because the dad knew that he had other divine and spiritual, you know, conditions that the father did not. And then at the same time, you know, the son didn't want to interact too much with the mother because she was a little toxic. She actually tried to kill his father. And it's just one of those odus where the person was born into very odd circumstances, right? But ultimately, he found his place with Orunmila, and he became a fabulous Babalawu. And that's really how the odu begins. So the Iyami Osoronga are a very interesting topic, especially here in the New World. And I wanted to touch on this before getting into other patakis because it is polemic to say. In the New World, it is said that the Babalawu is a child of the Iyami and that we have a direct link with them. That is why we are the ones that make offerings on humanity's behalf to the Iyami Osoronga, being that we are the ones that are recognized. That is why the Babalawu, from a Lukumi standpoint, is usually the one that is contracted to perform the slaughter that happens during the Orisha process, or the offerings to the Orishas, because it says that the Iyami penetrate within any consecratory room in a way where a Babalawu should be in the vicinity, because they want to be around people that they recognize or feel that could handle what's to come. So there was never any formal initiation process into the Iyami and Lukumi tradition other than becoming Babalawu, right, with the connotations that the brothers are aware of. But when you look at 𝗃𝗍𝗃𝗃, right, even till this day, you know, I remember when I did Ifa, it's really wild because I was sitting there, I was like 2 days old in Ifa, and my Yubona, 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗲, one of the most storied Babalawus in Havana, he invited a bunch of great guys to my ceremony along with my godfather, and even the ones that weren't invited, there was brothers that would still stop by, and I met a lot of really great people. And I remember, you know, the Babalawus were talking, and I'm just sitting there listening because I know nothing. And that topic actually came up where one of the brothers was like, yeah, he just received the Iyami Osoronga. And me, you know, not knowing any better, I kind of, you know, inadvertently said, "You can receive that?" And they all kind of just looked and smiled, and, you know, and it was a really great moment, you know, because just my inquisitiveness. But it was a real topic that was going on because we had always understood that that was not a deity that you receive. You know, you perform food to the witches, right? Comida a las brujas, as it was known, which was later identified as 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗄, as the relations between Cuba and Nigeria became much more intense. But, you know, I've spoken to many brothers now that have mentioned that they've initiated into that as well, where from the oldest times, we really, you know, that never really made it over. The Babalawu really dominated that and really usurped it from whoever we may have gotten it from. But in 𝗃𝗍𝗃𝗃, from what I understand, that still is a healthy cult, you know, where, you know, I know quite a few Babalawus that say that they've initiated into it, received the icon. A bunch of sisters as well that have mentioned that they're initiated in Iyami. Up until this point, me within my personal study, I haven't felt the need to move forward with it, just based on my upbringing and my training. But to anybody who has gone through the process, you know, and apart from that, anybody that's interested, obviously that's something that has to be taken down the 𝗃𝗍𝗃 route. But I'm sure things change because all things change with time. But based on the literature that I've read, you know, it was a very secret thing. And it was something very similar to roots, where you would kind of get kidnapped and brought in without any preparation to avoid you being able to step back or not move forward. But it was always something that was identified through looking at the person, observing them, analyzing them, and seeing if they fit the qualifications to be a part of that, you know, organization, because it's a very intense one. And it was all born here in Babao Sami. Now, speaking of the Iyami, because this is really, you know, this is where the Iyami Osoronga actually came down from heaven. This is where they first descended upon earth to extract their divine right upon all creation, right? As far as us being a food source. You know, it's really interesting when you look at the Iyami Osoronga as birds, right? And you kind of look at what dinosaurs were, and understanding that, you know, a dinosaur might actually be more related to a bird than a lizard.
So true, yeah.
And you begin to wonder, like, you know, they were around from the very beginning, you know, when you see things like eggs and whatnot. So, you know, when we go back to the beginning, there was a story. There is a story, one of the most popular and long, within this Odu, that speaks of a pataki where there was 2 lakes, right? And they were sacred and they were not to be touched by anything, and they were constantly being watched in a tree by crows, right, or birds, as they're mentioned. Now, Obatala was somebody that had a really big ego, and he plays a huge role here, and he went to war with the Iyami Osoronga here multiple times. And just to refresh your memory, do you remember 𝗃𝗍𝗃𝗃?
Yes.
Phil?
Yeah.
He's Babao Sami. Shout out to Ig for a great interview.
Reminds me of Lil Wayne.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, thorough guy. Mm-hmm. And the reason I think about him right now is because he's an initiate of Obatala as well, and a disciple of Obatala.
Okay.
And I actually, one of the guys that was at my Ifa, 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗃𝗃 Osa Meji, Charo Obatala as well. And, you know, he's a very popular Orisha here. But he was hearing this story, and Obatala really didn't like the idea of not being able to do something. You know, he was annoyed by that. So he said, what I'll do is I'll wait till everybody goes to sleep, pitch dark, and I'm going to get some water from the lake because I don't want to have to go to the river to get water every time. Mm-hmm. And what Obatala didn't realize was that the vibration of the water actually arrived up the tree and into the feet of the birds. So they knew immediately. So the sacred pact had been broken now. So they all started swarming, trying to kill Obatala. So Obatala obviously started running. And the first person's house they say that he ran to was Ogun's, right? And he told Ogun what was going on and that he needed something to defend himself with. And Ogun, in the meantime, actually confectioned something known as the 𝗃𝗿𝗿𝗃, which is the conical bell made out of iron, which was ultimately interpreted in the New World into Obatala's agogo. So technically, Obatala's agogo, or bell that everybody goes like, kicking, kicking, that bell is actually the New World version, at least within Lukumi, of the 𝗃𝗿𝗿𝗃. Right, I'm not sure. I know Obatala has the bing drums and things like that in 𝘃𝗺𝗂 now. But if he does have a bell, ultimately those bells are all related. But it was confectioned by Ogun, but it was never property of Ogun. And some people say that Ogun here was Babao Meji, right, when he actually constructed it. So Obatala, thanked him, but he said, Ogun was like, don't worry about it though. When they show up, I got my machete. You don't gotta do nothing. I'll handle it. But Ogun was not prepared for the force that was the Iyami. And they came in. It reminds me of the movie Birds, and they came in and they swarmed in and they killed Ogun.
The Hitchcock movie Birds?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a perfect analogy.
Okay.
So Obatala, was like, well, I'm not dying right now. And he ran out the back door again. And he did this successively with a bunch of different Orishas until he actually arrived at Eshu's house. And when he got there, 𝘃𝗺 kind of had an idea of what was going on because he saw everything. And he said, hey, let's not even stay here. Let's go running to Orunmila's house. And Obatala was like, Orunmila's a diviner. I mean, we're at war. And he was like, look, man, let's just go talk to the guy. So when he arrived, Dafa was performed immediately in Babao Meji, which is another name of Babao Sami, was revealed. It's also known as Babao Meji, which is the Fa of the twin destruction. And immediately, Orunmila recognized the 𝗃𝗿𝗿𝗃, not because he had seen it before, but based on what the sign was saying, was what they needed. So they did pertinent sacrifices to 𝘃𝗺 and gave 𝘃𝗺 what he needed. And they basically prepared a banquet, right? And there were 16 chairs, each representing the Meji, right? Even though it wasn't the Meji pursuing Obatala, each Meji had its own bird, etc., that would kind of overlook it. Mm-hmm. And when the Yami arrived, Orunmila and 𝘃𝗺 immediately said, hey, we know you're here for Obatala. We don't want you to kill us. We're going to give him to you. But just out of respect, to show that it's good faith, we prepared some food for you guys. Please have a seat, and you'll have Obatala momentarily. He's right in there, They were like, all right. So they sat down, and they started, nibbling and things like that, going through the hors d'oeuvres. And, time went on, and they ultimately were like, all right, we're ready for Obatala now. What they didn't realize is that 𝘃𝗺 had put an adhesive, whether it was honey or whatever it was, that caused them to stick to the wooden stumps that they were sitting on. So when they tried to get up and start attacking and whatnot, Orunmila pulled out the 𝗃𝗿𝗿𝗃, which, originally has a sharpened edge, or it's a knife, right? That's utilized for the sacrifices. He started slaughtering all of the Iyami. And they say that they got down to the last one. And Obatala came out of hiding, and Orunmila was about to, kill her. Mm-hmm. And she said, remember that if you get rid of me, creation ends. They were like, what are you talking about? She actually transformed into a woman. Mm. And, she was right because all the other female Orishas had been murdered. And Obatala was like, kill her, kill her, kill her. And he's like, well, bro, she's not wrong. We need a woman. It's just going to be us here. Like, what's the matter with you? And basically Orunmila said, well, let's negotiate. What terms do you bring? And she said, well, all of my daughters will have the same attributes as me. They will all have the characteristic of witch or 𝗃𝗿𝗿. So you'll have to know how to interact with them because now they'll be your daughters. But, we will follow whatever you say, being that you spared us. But our character, as aggressive as it is, we're only going to be able to mitigate it so much without offerings. So as long as you provide it, we'll stay at bay and we'll find peace. Because, it makes reference to that, even though, this perfect combination of man and woman based on nature and procreation is great. But remember that based on evolution, there are things that cause innately conflict between man and woman. The way we think, our brain composition, emotional intelligence, physical capabilities, all of these things are constantly, putting us at ends where we have to find a balance with each other. And it makes reference right back to this, because once they made the pact, Orunmila took on the last Iyami as a wife, and he actually procreated with her, right? And that's why till this day, the food to the witches is offered ideally at a crossroads of some sort, whether it's a 3 corners or a 4 corners, because they say that they consummated it in that area. So from that day forward, Orunmila now was the manipulator of 𝗿𝗲𝗿𝗶𝗍, or the knife. 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 faithfully at his side, and Obatala gave him the blessing, and they were able to start, procreating once again and reincarnating, and able to basically save humanity based on Obatala's, impatience. But it's a really epic story because it explains so much as far as, the behavior of the Iyami, why they're still around. Because if you think about it, if Orunmila would have killed her right there, we wouldn't have any evil on earth. But Orunmila realized that evil, unfortunately, is a necessity to be able to balance out the universe, the repercussions, etc. Because without it, there is no appreciation for all that is positive and good. And 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 took personal accountability to maintain the balance, while Orunmila focused on saving humanity, and Obatala just doing whatever it is that he does, So really epic pataki there. But focusing on Obatala, because he's probably the most pronounced Orisha here. There's a very interesting pataki as well, which makes reference to the constant issues Obatala was having with the Iyami Osoronga. When we look at Obatala, he represents the reproductive fluids based on both gender, being that he has ambiguous paths. And the Iyami Osoronga are an interesting entity because they actually enjoy consuming the fetus, right? Which is really unfortunate. But they're really the biggest obstacle towards birth. But the ironic part even more so is that the deity that commands them, which is actually Oshun and the 𝗿𝗲𝗹𝗁, has everything to do with childbirth. So it's not personal, it's simply business. We make these offerings and things like that while women are pregnant so that we can keep these energies at bay, and even more so than that, convert them into our allies so that they can facilitate a positive birth, right? I always think back, have you seen the live action Tarzan?
I have not.
What an amazing movie. Really towards the end, though, was the part that caught me because it's pure Iyami in pure form. Okay. When he impregnates his wife and they conceive and, they get to the point where they're actually going to give birth, the men are sitting outside. They're not allowed inside. They're all sitting there, very solemn, very stoic, waiting for the child to be born. And the women are inside with his wife that's about to give birth, and they facilitate the birth, and, they come out with the baby and they're chanting and they show him to him for the first time and all these different things. You begin to realize that the Iyami are there even when we're born. They are the ancestral mothers for a reason, because all of our spiritual lineage gets traced right back to them. So, in the new world now, everybody's very not everybody, forgive me, but there's this big, movement now where we're trying to, I don't want to say eliminate masculinity, but certain things are just seen as, ambiguous. No, I hear you there, yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, no, if men can do this, women can do this. If women can do this, men can do this. And there's simply things we cannot do, sometimes based on our gender. And, based on the symbolism of, a film like that, and then you look at the ideology that this 𝗏𝗏 states, is that there's things that men cannot do that women can do the same way, because before, when the Iyami first started, there was no men involved whatsoever. They started incorporating men because we're useful. We can lift things, we can throw things, we can sacrifice things. We have our own intuition, but initially, it was completely closed off. And then apart from that, within that sector, the woman is superior. So a lot of people are like, oh, Babalawu, you guys, you don't let no women in the room, this, that, and the third. There's certain aspects of Iyami practice and whatnot where men are not allowed either. So, it can be no frustration because there's things we're just not going to be able to accomplish spiritually based on either gender.
Okay.
But neither here nor there, Obatala once again had beef with these women. And in this sign, he was manifested as the cotton plant, right? The nice white poof. And the story says that the Iyami would love to eat the seeds of the cotton in the form of crows. So Obatala was literally getting destroyed. And he was really tired because he couldn't defend himself. I mean, he was cotton, right? And this was the path of Babao Sami, which means the father of the cloth, which was born here. And Obatala went to visit Orunmila. Babao Sami was revealed, where Ifa said that he needed to perform sacrifice with needles. And when the sacrifice was performed, they inserted the blunt edge of the needle into him, so the pointy edge was, protruding. And the next time when the Iyami tried to land to be able to eat the cotton and the seeds, they got pricked by the needles. So he was able to finally defend himself, right? So if we interpret Ifa, the symbolism here is heavy. Obatala is the white cloth. It's a metaphor for initiation. He was very docile here. He was trying to find a way to defend himself. The white color, at least in the story, being connotated as good. And then you had the Iyami coming, or the birds coming to consume it. Now, this makes reference to the Iyami's MO in general. They're always trying to consume our internal organs, which are the preferred 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗁. So the seeds of the cotton are either the internal organs or the fetus. Obviously, to plant it is to grow one. It makes reference to all those things once more, where Obatala had to defend himself. And there's actually other odus, not to divert too much, but when you look at the odu of 𝗃𝗶𝗸𝗲, where the Iyami would attack the cat, and until he did 𝗃𝗶𝗸𝗁 with the 20 blades and inserted them into his fingers, that's when he became the tiger, where he had to defend himself. But if you notice, all of these sharp objects make reference to the 𝗃𝗶𝗶𝗃, or the bell/sword that was constructed in this odu altogether. They have an aversion towards metal, and they're not fans of it per se, or anything sharp. So that's a huge pataki here as well, and it's where Babao Sami was born, was because due to cotton being able to survive at that point, clothing and things were manifested, and people were able to benefit from that. And Obatala, had the first clothing line. So, that was positive, to say the least. Another very big Orisha here as well is Shango. And it speaks of the interaction between Obatala and Shango. So in this odu, Obatala, in the manifestation of Orunla, which in the Lukumi is seen as a female version, hadn't heard from her son in quite some time. So she performed divination, or had Orunmila do it on her behalf. Babao Sami was revealed, where Ifa said, I'm not, in Spanish it sounds much better. A la tercera va la vencida, right?
Okay.
Or you don't lose until the third bullet, I think is the best way of saying it. But it was basically saying 3 strikes, you're out. And Orunla was like, well, I really don't understand that. So she was told to, go to Shango's palace and visit him and perform sacrifice and to not give up and have good character. Now, mind you, Orunla was always dressed in all white, once again making reference to Babao showing the white cloth in this sign. And she was going to visit Shango, and 𝗀𝗄 started messing with her mind. Like, there's a part of the story where she walked up to a kid, and the kid asked her for help because he was carrying a huge barrel of palm oil. And when she held it for him, he tossed it on her. So at that point, she was completely soaked, like huge taboo, red palm oil for Obatala. Then there's another part where, the same thing happened with mud, where somebody kicked mud or a horse or something like that. And the third time was when she actually arrived at the palace doors. And, she said, I'm Shango's mother. I'd like to visit my son. And the guards looked and said, ma'am, there's no way a queen would ever look like you. Please don't bother us any further.
As in, like, she didn't look good?
She didn't look good. Oh. She was covered in red palm oil, dirt. Like, she had been through the ringer,
Yeah.
So at that point, she said, the hell with it. I'm just going to lay down and die here because I'm not dealing with this no more. But she just stayed there, and she kind of reflected on life. And, they say that she fell asleep. And when she woke up, Shango saw her and was completely flabbergasted at what heard or what he had seen. And he lifted her immediately, and they were like, Your Highness, please don't interact with the vagabonds. And he was like, yo, it's my mom. So immediately she was rushed in. She was given the opportunity to bathe, be dressed appropriately. And, the guards apologized. Obviously they didn't know any better. And her and Shango started communicating. And, Shango said, it's been so long since we've seen each other. She says, I know, I didn't want to, invade upon your privacy. I know you're trying to run this kingdom and whatnot. I've just missed you. And he said, I could really use some advice. And, they started talking, and he basically allowed or wanted his mother to live in the compound for counsel and just for her to have a pretty comfortable life, So through that reunion, Shango was able to accomplish great things, even further so. So this Odu speaks of the link between Obatala and Shango all the way around. There's various Odus that speak of this, whether it's 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗏, 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗍𝗏, about their inseparable relationship and how Shango really utilized and needed the wisdom that Obatala or Orunla, depending, because it was in some versions his mother, in some versions his father, how he needed that advice and that tranquility to be able to, grow. This is another Odu as well. It's one of the Odus that speaks of why Shango's necklace has a white bead as well. 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗏 speaks of it, but Osa Meji speaks of it as well, where Orunla gifted him the white cloth to incorporate in his red one, or the white bead to incorporate with the red beads, to bring that tranquility and clarity so he can make the best decisions as a king moving forward. So we love Shango, a positive pataki about Shango for once, right, Phil?
Right, because this guy is chaos, he's incarnate.
He's a toxic boy, but today, he did the right thing for sure.
All right, yeah. Another
good story about Shango here as well. And in this sign, Shango was king at this point, kind of continuing from the last one. But, heavy is the head that wears the crown. Not everybody likes the king. Not everybody likes royalty. So he had a lot of people that wanted him eliminated as well. And Shango, loved to eat. There's one thing about this Orisha is Shango has an insatiable appetite. He loves to eat, whether it's his cornmeal, his ram, his bananas, whatever it is. A lot of scripture just speaks about Shango and food. I mean, that must be why he was identified as the best cook ever. So, eventually he had to start experimenting with it. But there was a plot to poison him, right? And Shango had a servant or / brother, however you want to interpret it, named 𝗀𝗍𝗿. Now, 𝗀𝗍𝗿 is the Orisha that is manifested through the horns of the buffalo. And 𝗀𝗍𝗿 was Shango's right-hand man, personal advisor, everything. So 𝗀𝗍𝗿 was kind of getting the vibe of, people aren't really feeling the king. Some of the ones in like the inner social circle, advisors, counselors, etc. So 𝗀𝗍𝗿 was really on his toes when it came to the king, because apart from that, he was his bodyguard. He filled a lot of hats, but Shango trusted him more than anybody. So that day, they were going to make a royal banquet for Shango in his honor, his feast day and whatnot. But they actually had put a taboo in his food. And at least in this case, the taboo was pigeon, right? Now, this is a highly debated topic as well. I can say personally, Shango does eat pigeon, but, this was one of the cases where he did not. So, to each his own, each clan, each interpretation. But for some reason, 𝗀𝗍𝗿 felt the need to taste the king's food before he did. And some people say it was under the influence of 𝗀𝗏𝗏, being that Shango had provided 𝗏𝗶𝗸𝗏 initially, whatever it was. But he said, Your Highness, let me try this for you. Things have been hectic lately. And Shango said, well, if you feel. And he did. And when he tasted it, he immediately recognized this has pigeon in it. So obviously the people that, had made the food or orchestrated things, they were held accountable and executed and whatnot. And that's why till this day, the majority of Orisha houses, when you're going to feed Shango pigeons, they feed them to 𝗀𝗍𝗿 instead, which are the horns, which ideally should be filled based on what this Odu says. They go through a process themselves. Now, everything is situational. Like I said, Shango eats pigeon, but, based on situations, 𝗀𝗍𝗿 definitely should be there. And that's why for anybody who has a consecrated Shango, within the Lukumi practice, you should have your 𝗀𝗍𝗿 horns, and ideally they should be filled. The Babalawu has a huge role with those. So, once again, Shango compensated 𝗀𝗍𝗿 in the highest of ways. Until this day, 𝗀𝗍𝗿 is the only Orisha, besides possibly 𝗲𝗏𝗏, depending on how things look, that sits on top of Shango. Right? Orisha Oko has this right as well. But, he appreciated him for saving his life. So, another good story about Shango. He really didn't deserve the assassination attempt. And somebody cared about him enough to be able to defend him and protect him. Right?
Okay.
Shango here had a lot of enemies. He's a very pronounced Orisha in this sign. This Odu within 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏 is where the verse of 𝗀𝗏𝗃𝗀𝗹𝘁𝗏, if I recall correctly, it basically makes reference to when Shango had many enemies, right? 𝗀𝗏𝗃𝗀𝗹. And he had many enemies. And he was looking for a way to defeat them all because they were starting to unify against him. And he went to visit Orunmila. And when he did that, the famous 𝗃𝗶𝗸𝗏 of the 201 stones was marked, where Shango was like, what am I going to do with these? And Orunla was like, you'll know. So Shango had the stones, and that day, ironically, the other armies were going to basically attack Oyo. And everybody kind of cowered out, and Shango was just there alone, and he said, all I have is these rocks. So he started throwing them. But the thing is when he threw it, the pebble turned into a boulder, you know, on fire, brimstone, lightning, all these different things, and started imploding his enemies, right? And so he started throwing them again and again and again and again, and he won the battle, and the rocks came back, and, you know, from that day forward, he became synonymous with Ajaka, or Jakuta, as it's known, which means the stone thrower. It's one of the titles. So it's the reason why, you know, in various verses of Ifa, for anybody that studies it, you'll see there's numerous odus where you'll have a verse that says, okay, you have to feed Shango with a ram and 201 pebbles and all these different things. It ultimately originates here in Babao Sami. Okana Meji as well, because in that odu it speaks of Jakuta as well when he threw the rocks. But it's a pretty common theme. If you ever encounter it in one sign and see it in another, don't, you know, be too worried or baffled. There's various ones where Shango had to perform this 𝗃𝗏𝗃𝗏, to be able to defeat his enemies. So pretty common theme that manifested here as well.
Is this an older one? Like an older...
Babao Sami is actually on the tail end. So he's part of the last 8, right? So 1 through 8 is, I believe, Obe through Okana. And then the second 8 to fulfill the 16 is from Ogunda to Ofun. So it's not that... I mean, that is the senior order. But as far as age, you know, the older ones are actually Babao Yaku Meji and Babao Iwori Meji. Babao Fu Meji, even though he's number 16, is actually pretty much contemporary with the first guys, even though Yaku Meji is older than everybody. But as far as elder, Eyobe was able to accomplish that based on his wisdom and his sacrifice. But Babao Sami, even though it's on the tail end, doesn't mean it's any less potent. To be frank with you, you know, it's one of those odus that's really... It's really intense, and it's really combustible. It's actually associated with the elements of like air and fire and combustibility and things like that. That's why deities like Shango are so big, or even the Orisha Oya as well, because it's a very hot odu as well. Where, you know, fire and elements like that are pretty prominent, right? Mm-hmm. Speaking of Babao Sami, you know, there's a pataki here that, you know, from the moment I read it, always intrigued me because, you know, my father being from a medical background and me hearing about it and studying a little bit of medicine before I ultimately chose not to go into medical school. In this odu, it speaks of the human body, and it was Babao Sami in this case. And this sign was where, I believe, if I'm saying it correctly, the leukocytes, or the white blood cells, first manifested, right? Which are, you know, the ones that have to do with the immune system, protecting us from cancer, things of that nature. And ironically, all those symptoms have to do with the Iyami Osoronga. So the natural defenses against these energies were born here. But the issue is, you know, Babao Sami never got sick, but he was pretty unproductive as well. Like he had no strength to be able to do anything, you know. He was vegan, kind of. He didn't consume any protein, animal protein for sure. So he went to visit Orunmila to see, you know, because eternal life really wasn't worth a lack of productivity. You know, you're living forever and getting nothing done. So when Orunmila performed divination, Babao Sami was revealed, where Ifa said that through sacrifice and interacting with his brother, Babao Gunda Meji, he was going to be able to find the solution to his problems. So when he visited his brother was the complete opposite. You know, he was red-blooded. He had everything. Like, he was just, you know, he was a blacksmith. It's basically Ogun in person. And Osa Meji let him know, hey, I have this situation. You know, what can I do? What can I offer? And they say that they sacrificed an animal. They don't necessarily distinguish which one, but that Ogunda Meji gave it to Osa Meji to consume. And apart from that, he actually inserted iron into the blood cells. Now, when the hemoglobin, which manifested here, first started going in, it completely renovated the human body. You know, there was strength. Of course, you know, it's a balance. You know, there's issues that come with it. But he was able to become productive, and he actually gifted a white blood cell or white blood cells to his brother Osa Meji. And from that, we all descend, right? Where we have, you know, red blood cells for one function and white blood cells for another, and us trying to find that balance based on nutrition and habits to be able to have longevity, right? But this is actually where iron first manifested within the bloodstream of human beings. So all of those things have had a huge positive effect. But before then, we had none of it. So all of that's here in Babao Sami as well. Going back to the Iyami Osoronga, there's a pataki here that speaks once again of Obatala, right? And they say he had a son named 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏, which some people say was Shango, debatable. But in this sign, 𝗃𝗶𝗏𝗏 had made enemies or insulted the Iyami Osoronga. And when they found out he was Obatala's son, they wanted him even more. So the pursuit was completely, you know, it was just very intense. They were willing to stop at nothing to kill Obatala's son, to not only shame Obatala, but to, you know, seek retribution for the disrespect that 𝗃𝗏𝗏 had. So 𝗃𝗏𝗏 went running back to his dad, and his dad was like, bro, I don't want any issues with this woman. With these women, we need to go visit your brother Orunmila. And when they went, divination was performed, and Babao Sami was revealed, where Ifa said that they needed to initiate 𝗃𝗏𝗏 into the cult of the Babalawu, right? Babalawu, basically, when you translate it, means Ogun's sons who were kings. And it makes reference to them all having the mobility and ability with the knife, right? So it was time to initiate 𝗃𝗏𝗏 into the sacred rites of the knife, or the 𝗀𝗏𝗏, as it was known. And, you know, it speaks of a big epic scene, things we won't get into here. And with this initiation and with the tool that was Ada or Obe, or however you want to refer to the knife as, they were able to defend themselves against the Iyami Osoronga. Until this day, the Babalawus are the ones that, you know, basically give out this deity or this energy, better said, or process. So, mind you, there's huge debates about this within our spirituality, where, you know, there's this debate about the knife of the Orisha. We're not here to go over topics that we've already given an opinion on, but it's known as the 𝗃𝗏𝗏. You know, through my study in, you know, not only 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 but Lukumi, it is interesting that this phrase is a breakdown of a phrase known as 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏, which is a process that happens in 𝘃𝗶𝗱 for those Babalawus who are ultimately going to view Odu, right? Based on the way their ceremony kind of maneuvers. But 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏, 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, it's obviously a grammatical deterioration. Some people would say it's even a grammatical deterioration of 𝗀𝗏𝗏𝗏, which has a whole different definition as well as translation. But what I'm ultimately getting at is that when you look at what scripture states, right, how the Awos had to go through a specific process to be able to maneuver the knife, where Osa Meji speaks of this, Ogunna Meji, Oturakana, etc. There really is no literature to support the Olorisha aspect of things, where the Odu Owani Chobe says the Olorisha is born with the knife, that they don't necessarily have to go through a ceremonial process to be able to maneuver it. What they need to do is simply prepare themselves, and they're able to. So, you know, I'll leave that there for that. But this is the Odu of the 𝗀𝗏𝗏𝗏, basically, where in Ogunna Meji it was constructed, but in Osa Meji it was actually given. So from a ceremonial standpoint, so they play huge roles together when it came to that concept of the knife, being that this is an Odu that speaks as well as Ogunna Meji of when we went from agriculturist to hunters, right? So it speaks of that. Another really great concept and interesting one that most people don't know the origins about that was born in this sign has to do with the Orisha Oya and Agayou, right? So Agayou here was a mammoth of a man.
Volcano guy,
mountain guy, 8 feet tall, whatever. I always think of Shaq whenever I think about Agayou. Just a real, specimen of a human being, real robust. So Agayou here had made some enemies because he was a big guy. He'd throw his weight around. He did some things he wasn't supposed to. And they're like, we're gonna kill him. Kind of like Frankenstein. You've done enough havoc here. We're gonna off you. So basically, in good Frankenstein Bigfoot form, they started chasing him. Right, pitchforks and torches and all these other things. And Agayou's like, man, I'm gonna die today. So he went running into the jungle, right? And he had some good stride length, so he was able to get some space, but eventually this wasn't going to last forever. So he actually ran into a woman, and that woman was Oya, and she said, Agayou, why do you run? He said, because I've done a lot of things wrong, and, people want to kill me now. She said, well, we can't have that. So Oya actually took off her skirt and gave it to Agayou. He said, I'm really not into this. And she's like, well, if you want to live, you'll thank me later. And she said, I'm going to run this way towards your enemies. You're going to run the other way. And, we're going to escape. We're going to dress you as a woman.
And cause a diversion?
Cause a diversion, right?
All right.
Yeah. So Oya took Agayou's clothes, put them on, and, she grew a beard real quick because she had that ability. And she actually gave Agayou her hair. And she went running. So when she went running towards the other direction, they're like, oh, look, it's Agayou. So they went running after her. And Agayou went basically running to where they said they were going to meet up. So when they caught Oya, they were like, we got you. And she was like, I'm a woman. And they were like, oh, my God, bald-headed and bearded. And they were like, where's Agayou? She's like, I don't know who that is. And they kind of all looked at each other and said, man, bro, the hell with this guy, bro. Like, we're just going to go back home. I don't think he's going to come back. And they say that Oya actually met up with Agayou at a secret grove, and they actually got married here. And that's why they share the same colors. Like, a lot of people have always asked me, like, Baba, why does Agayou wear a skirt? It's not a skirt. It's more like I'm not going to say a loincloth, but I don't know how to term it. It's, it's like a flowy pants set that goes on top of the pants.
Yeah, like they do in Moana.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, just like
the
that.
Guys
right?
wear.
Like Agayou was Scottish, right? So, but they actually got together. Agayou was forever indebted to her. He fell in love with her. He thanked her. And they actually had kids together, and they had 9 kids, ironically. Nice. So this is one of the 𝗏𝗏𝗏s that, and Egong here is a huge theme that we haven't even touched on yet. But this is one of the 𝗏𝗏𝗏s where, they had 9 kids together. So that's what the 9 colors represent. It represents the 9 sons that Agayou and Oya had together here. That's why they both have that color scheme, where Agayou will have the 9 colors as well as Oya. And interpretively, you could say here that Agayou was, one of the mythological parents of Egong. Or maybe the story, the way it kind of got manipulated, maybe Shango was interpreted as Agayou or vice versa, what have you. But it all comes from that royal Oyo lineage. No matter how you slice that apple, Egong is really posterity of Oyo. Like, there's certain things that are really Oyo-centric. Shango initiation, Babalawu is a huge, huge deity over there. And, of course, Egong. To the point where, in the Odu Babao Sami, it speaks of the actual birth of the Isang Egong icon, right? With connotations through the pataki that we just mentioned. But in Babao Sami, it was identified, or the feathers that needed to go into the Egong icon were identified, right? As far as from a consecration standpoint. And they come from the 3 birds who are seen as the ones who kind of guard the afterlife, right? One of them was the 𝗏𝗶𝗍, the other one was the 𝗀𝗏𝗏, and the last one was 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 or 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏, which makes reference to the African gray parrot, right? And the other ones being various species and colors, blue and red, of the Turako bird, if I'm not mistaken. And these feathers ultimately were placed, and these birds ultimately were collaborated with Egong, and their feathers were placed so that Egong knew who to follow and who to listen to, right? So when you look at the Isang Egong icon, you're going to see the famous atoristics, which should be at least 9, based on Isang, making reference to Mesang, which is 9, or Osa, which is the 9th 𝗏𝗏𝗏 in the Caracol. All here, concepts that were born here, or the 9 bones, which represent each of the sons. That confection Egong, the red cloth, which was gifted by Shango to his stepson, The cowrie shells for prosperity, ideally, or the multiple colors representing all of our ancestors ever. And then the 3 feathers that go on top. And like the 𝗿𝗲𝗍𝗶𝗏 says, it resembles almost a lightning rod or something that's meant to kind of set the difference, or an epicenter. And this is why they say that the Egungun icon is the one that, really organizes people's spirituality. Like, I met people that are scratched, people that are in División, a bunch of different traditions, Vodun, etc., or that have hand of Ifa. There's something that happens when they receive Egungun where there's almost like this organization and tranquility that occurs that makes them even better spiritists, or children that, come into trance and whatnot. So Egungun is a huge focal point for everybody. It's one of those deities that after you have hand of Ifa is really one of the first ones you should receive, so that you can reinitiate that link between your ancestors and yourself, going all the way back to the dawn of creation, because it's not based on your last name. It's based on your Odu of Ifa. That's why for any deity to be received, you need to have your Odu of Ifa, because without your Odu of Ifa, or your hand of Ifa, or 𝗃𝗶𝗍𝗏, we don't know how to consecrate it for you. So huge themes there, because there's a bunch of schools now where it's like, give them Egungun before Ifa, give them Ajé before Ifa, 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏, Ori, all these different things. How do I know how to consecrate it without your Odu? Because I don't know your taboos. I don't know any of these things. So whether it's here or across the ocean, Orunmila is first, just because of that, right? So big, big, big themes.
Love it.
In this Odu as well, it speaks of why the Iyami occupied trees, why the preferred space is trees, right? When we look at birds, especially the predatory ones that the Iyami manifest, they need vantage points, whether it be the crows, whether it be vultures, owls, or whatnot. Where are they? They're always at the top of a tree, because from there you can kind of see everything. So in this sign, the Iyami were really terrorizing the village. And, they needed the animals for themselves. They didn't have any to necessarily offer. So they said, well, what are we going to give to these entities or these deities so that they'll leave us in peace, right? And they visited Orunmila. Osa Meji was revealed, where Ifa said they needed to give the Iyami what they did not want. They said, well, the only thing we don't want is the intestines, to be honest with you. We'd like to use everything else. And he said, well, offer that. And they said, well, we can't climb the tree. And he said, offer it at the base. And when they offered it there and things started getting really rancid, the Iyami started going crazy and consuming it. And it caused them to pay more attention to that rather than the people, or cursing them or whatnot. There was an interesting concept that, if you recall our interview with 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏, remember the 𝗃𝗃?
Yes.
And he spoke about a concept there that I didn't mention in the video at the moment, but really stuck out to me. And I couldn't repronounce it for the life of me. My Creole is horrible. But he spoke about that spirit that supposedly was sent to the person's house to sit on top of the house and suck the energy out. Remember when the kid passed away?
Yeah.
That's the Iyami Osoronga. And it's ironic because the phrase that's used is the one they use to refer to witches over there in Haiti. So when we look at this archetype and these concepts, they can be seen universally throughout culture. Anthropologically, there's something like this in every culture somehow. So this is why in this Odu, offerings to trees were first made. So when you look at the Egungun icon, it ultimately derives from this pataki, because we sacrifice to wood, which is a very foreign concept for the Lukumi practitioners, being that we're so Oyo-centric. We're like, if there's no rock, there's no Orisha. Like if my 𝘃𝗺𝗃𝗍 doesn't have a rock, it has no Orisha. Or if my Egungun doesn't have a rock, it's not an Orisha. But wood is a living thing as well, And in Osa Meji, as well as various other Odu, such as Obeyono, was where the wood actually would consume animals, or would consume the animal parts, because the Iyami were there and the trees would benefit as well. Babao Sami speaks of why, from an ancestral standpoint, we have a very long trajectory where it says the original ancestors of human beings were trees. And that's why we still have this custom now of offering it to the trees. 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏 speaks of this as well. Then animals, right? And then the Orishas, and then ultimately us, But Osa Meji speaks of all these concepts going all the way back to the beginning. The Odu Babao Sami, speaking about the Iyami, once again touches on the Orisha Oshun. Now, she's not a very pronounced one here, other than just the euphemism for the Iyami. But there is one thing that is attributed to her here. And people were suffering from issues in their blood, right? We spoke about the hemoglobin and the leukocytes earlier. But there were a lot of diseases that were being transferred in the blood. And, there's a slew of them, right? From blood pressure all the way to anything else. And in this Odu, Osa Meji was revealed and they were told to perform sacrifice to Oshun. And Oshun, with the sacrifice and with the medicine she was able to apply, was able to clean the blood. And from that day forward, she became the queen of all blood and stomach diseases within the body. So whenever anybody has issues with the blood, a lot of people think of Babalawu, which is great. But Osa Meji says that the Orisha that's most effective for handling any situations from a blood standpoint is actually Oshun. And of course, Babalawu could be in conjunction, but she's the queen. So, in this Odu, she basically cured all blood diseases. And it makes reference to her being the river to a certain degree, right? And when you look at blood, veins, it represents tributaries, the canals, rivers, and all these different things. And she was the one who was able to replenish it to make it better. This is actually the Odu of the blood transfusion, where one was switched for another because Oshun actually changed it out. So pretty incredible concept there on her behalf. Babao Sami. There's an interesting pataki here as well. Eshu speaks here to a certain degree. And Eshu here was actually the Orisha who first realized intercourse, right? So up until this point, it says that the male and female reproductive organs were either non-existent or in the wrong place, right? So based on the literature, it says that the female reproductive organ was actually under the arm, right? And this was pretty inconvenient because it really, it just wasn't conducive to, practicality. So Eshu was trying to find a way to take advantage of this, right? So he went for divination, and the name of the deity that ultimately he was with or that facilitated this escapes me for the life of me. But he was told to perform divination with a banana, right? And when he did, the banana was inserted in the place where the male reproductive organ is now.
No!
Yeah. So this Odu actually speaks of the birth of the anatomy, right? And, it says that the woman performed sacrifice and her, situation was put where it is now. And Eshu and her, when they interacted, they interacted in, that which is most commonly done now. And from that point forward, everything kind of took its proper space. And once again, this Odu makes reference to the reproduction once more. So Eshu is actually, he's kind of father to us all to a certain degree because he was the first one to ever, actually engage in the act with a woman. So, he's been a great example, obviously, all the way down to us. So very interesting pataki there as well, but it speaks of the banana, which is a huge offering here. And for anybody that has this Odu, bananas are great, specifically the 𝗀𝗲𝗍𝗍, which are the smaller ones. But anything you could put is fine, but nice big banana next to Eshu, it'll be all right.
Yeah.
And this Odu is one of the Odus why our Orisha process is longer than our brother 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗁's tradition. So in 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗁, for the most part, the Orisha process takes 3 days, right? Ultimately culminating in 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏, which is ita, which happens on the third day, where divine information is revealed, with the cowrie shell. But in the Odu of Babao Sami, it speaks of why, for us, it is 7 days in opposition. Because Babao Sami was trying to emulate Babao Oragun, or Babao Meji, being that the 𝗃𝗏 initiation was identified as 7 days as well. So that's why ours is a little bit longer, because I've even heard of clans in 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗁 getting the 𝗃𝗏 done in as soon as 3 days, which is perfectly fine. They have the literature to support it. But Babao Meji says that our 𝗃𝗏 initiation should be 7 days, and Babao Sami says why Orisha initiation should be 7 days as well. And this all kind of reverts back to the Odu of Okanafung that speaks of the 7-day creation process. And this is a traditional 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗁 verse that speaks of the various days of the week when they first manifested, before the famous 4-day 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 calendar, which is utilized now, came into the mix. But that's actually a traditional story where it says in antiquity that the week was 7 days. So it's not a Lukumi innovation by any means.
Oh.
So we based ourselves on that, where each day represents something different. Where the first day was the day of financial success. The third day, which ultimately was Wednesday, was the day of turmoil. That's why Wednesday is like hump day. Like, oh man, am I going to make it through this, you know?
Yeah.
Sunday ended up being the day of rest because that's when the battle ended. And ironically, those 7 days were characterized by a war with none other than the Iyami Osoronga. So that's actually in the 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗏, right? This is an Odu that speaks of trance. For anybody that has Babao Sami, other than the 𝗃𝗶𝗸𝗏 brothers and the Lukumi, of course, you know, it speaks of trance, where the person is a born medium, right? The spiritual influence, where energy started descending upon the subconscious and the pineal gland, and all of those things first manifested here. That's why Oya and Agayou are such very popular energies here. And they say that this occurred when 𝗃𝗶𝗶𝗏, which was the eagle, had a wife. And when 𝗃𝗶𝗶𝗏 would leave the nest, she would go fraternize with Orisha. And Orisha, you know, would receive her. And the way you read the scripture, it sounded like an affair, honestly. So the eagle would come back, and he was looking for his wife. And they said he came back after 7 days, which once again reiterates the 7-day initiatory process length. And when he walked in, you know, he was appalled because he saw his wife dancing with Orisha under that influence. So they say that he flipped out, he killed the wife, or he tried to kill the wife. Orisha got scared away, all of these different things, and then the ceremony ended on the 7th day. But that's why this Odu says that Orisha descends upon its mediums the same way an eagle descends upon its prey, right? So when you look at somebody that's actually coming down, there's like a dual situation that's occurring there. You have energy that's fluctuating from the earth up through the feet all the way, ideally, to the head. And then you have a centrifuge spiritually that's happening from heaven descending upon the head, which is characterized by the eagle based on this sign. And when they meet, it's like the champagne bottle explosion combustion type thing. Poof. And just like that, trance is facilitated. But it takes time. You know, that's why when you look, I mean, if you look at the story, it says that it took 7 days for the eagle's wife to come down with Orisha. I mean, it feels that long when the poor drummers are playing 20, 30 minutes. You know, if they're really building up the beat and allowing the dancer or whoever's just there to come down, it takes a while. You know, at least 20 minutes of playing, in my opinion. It's grueling. But it happens, you know, and this Odu speaks of one of the first times that it actually did happen. And it was actually the eagle's wife that fraternized with Orisha, and then it occurred. So, interesting stuff for sure.
Okay, man.
Where are we at?
We're an hour.
Really?
In. Yeah, man.
Yeah, it flies, man. And just to think about all the information that we could still go on
we
about.
need to create an IFA encyclopedia.
You know, it's we do. I tell you, I just want to write down so much stuff because sometimes there's patakis that, like, I'll come into the video, right? And, you know, I really don't plan too much.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll come in and I'll start speaking and I'll be like, man, I remember that story. Should I say this one? Should I say that one? You know, and you just think about how much you leave on the table. But, you know, it leaves room for more content. But we definitely got to write some things down. But in resume, Osa Meji is one of the most important Mejis, for sure. Just based on the Iyami being here. Now, you know, those were some very popular videos as well. We ended up making actually a part 2 about it. And to be honest with you, I think this one ended up kind of being a part 3 as well, because it's just a concept in this sign that you cannot avoid or overlook, right, or overstate, because Osa Meji is the Iyami personified. Yeah. So for anybody that has this Odu, just as a little free takeaway, if I was Osa Meji, I'd be performing 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏 on a monthly basis, right? If you are not a Babalawu and unable to perform it on your own, get with your Babalawu and come out with a plan to be able to make it happen as frequently as possible. If not on a monthly basis, at least every 3 months, because, you know, when Osa Meji comes out, the amount of stuff we have to do to kind of mitigate it, because it comes in so hot, you know, it's really intense, and these ladies are nothing to play with. Another quick freebie: be sure to take flowers to the ocean in this sign, And I hope you guys liked it, man. One of my favorite odus to study, bar none.
Yeah, make sure you guys leave comments, and
yeah, we might make a part 2.
Yeah, this is a great episode. And also, it's that time again.
Los miembros.
Yeah, that's right, guys. So if you are wondering what this is, right under this video, there's a little join button, which will give you access to our membership program, which is super cool. We got 3 different tiers, all offering its own perks and advantages, whether it's live shows, private shows, or early releases, discounts on merch, all that jazz. So today we're going to show some love to just the VIPs.
Oh, man.
This is our top tier.
Oh, yeah.
So shout out to 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 Beauty.
Okay, yeah.
Shout out to Katrina Jones.
Thank you.
Shout out to 𝘃𝗶𝗍. 𝘃𝗶𝗍 is an OG.
I got the keys.
We got Billy Tan.
Okay.
Jennifer Rowe.
Yep. Blessings,
we got Antonio Levere.
Thank you.
Joe Smith.
Okay.
Treasure with a Z.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
We got Yogi Rudy.
Okay, that's a running.
And let's wrap it up with Animal Crackers.
Oh, those are 2 banger names right there. Yogi Rudy and Animal Crackers. We're going to have to come up with a name Olympics for the members for sure.
Yeah, we really should. Yeah.
Guys, classes are available. 4-week curriculum, basic knowledge on 𝗃𝗏𝗍𝗶 Orisha, or the Mojuba class is doing great as well. Get in there if you want to further your Orisha 𝗃𝗏 education with us at 𝘄𝗶𝗵𝗏 School. Botanicacandlesandmore.com is up and running for all service and product needs. We ship. If you can't catch us on YouTube video, be sure to listen to the podcast on Apple, iHeartRadio, etc. A big thank you from all of us here at Our Roots Podcast, and until next time, see the light.